Hey guys, welcome to Always Pinkies Up. Here on Always Pinkies Up, we have real conversations about real topics with real people. And today, we're going to hear from Black Lives Matter activist, organizer, and educator, DeRay McKesson. Hey DeRay,
Hey, it's good
how
to be
are
here.
you?
I'm good. It's a rainy day in New York
It
City.
is definitely a rainy day, so thank you for trekking from Brooklyn to Harlem to come and sit and chat with me. So
Yeah.
I'm particularly excited because I have been trying to sit with you for
We
months.
did it though. We did it. Here
We
we
did
are.
it. Here we are, and I feel like now is with the current climate of the country. I feel like now it's like the perfect time. I'm really big on timing, so thank you again for coming. And before we get into our conversation, just want to do a little pinky up toast.
So funny.
Cheers. All right. So before we get into your history and where you're from and all of those things, your background, I think it's important to establish that, yes, you are a Black Lives Matter activist. And before we dive in, I just really want you to explain for the people who may not know what the Black Lives Matter movement is about, because there have been a lot of interviews and people who have said that Black Lives Matter is, anti-American. The Black Lives Matter movement is about mass violence, and you guys the movement fosters more separation than solving, political issues. So I really want you to just explain to everybody what the Black Lives Matter movement is and, what it stands for.
Yeah, so I think about when we originally got in the street in August of 2014 because the police killed Mike Brown, that there was an unprecedented level of activism in Ferguson that led to protests all across the country and across the world. What we now call the Black Lives Matter movement is the outgrowth of that incredible activism that started in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. The movement began as a call to end violence, and that call remains a call today. So we stood in the street because the police were killing people. We know that we can live in a world where people don't die by violence. We believe that. So when I think about the recent events in Charlottesville, where the white supremacists brought violence to a city and brought hate to a city, that is antithetical to the mission of all the people that I know that I've stood with across the country. And people do get confused. The difference between like the movement and there's an organization that has the same name. But what's important to remember is no organization started the movement, right? Like people came outside and they are the reason why more people came outside, and we created an infrastructure in St. Louis to allow that to happen that didn't rely on any one or two or three people or organization to make it move. So it's been powerful to see activism across the country and the world in this moment, specifically about race, equity, and justice.
Are you satisfied with the work that has been done so far, even though there's so much more work to be done? Do you feel as if you guys really started on the right track and you're really headed towards something that is monumental and that is going to last for the next hundreds and hundreds of years, prayerfully, if people get behind it and continue to uplift what the movement stands for?
Yeah, I'm mindful that, what we call the civil rights movement was a decade-long worth of activism, and we're like 3 years into the, sort of this iteration of struggle at a mass scale like this. I think that what we've done incredibly well, all of us, have changed the conversation about race, justice, and equity. That the way we talk about things in public is just so different today. That I think about protests is the idea of telling the truth in public, and that we use our bodies to tell the truth about Mike and Rakia and Ion and so many other people, and that we disrupted board meetings and commissions to tell the truth about them. So I think we won on changing the conversation. I think the next thing is to make sure that we change systems and structures so that people's lives are actually different.
So let's rewind to you growing up in Baltimore, because I'm from Baltimore also. Shout out to Baltimore. Baltimore is also in a place that is struggling. It's weird because growing up, I never noticed or knew how bad Baltimore was. I don't know if my parents were great at shielding me from it or if it just wasn't that bad. But I feel like now Baltimore has been, on the map and known for a lot of the crime and, the drug activity and things like that. So how was growing up in Baltimore for you? And specifically, I saw that you tweeted that you lost your mom at 3. But she didn't pass, but she left you and your sister due to drug addiction when you were 3 years old. So how was that for you, and how has that shaped who you are, today?
Yeah, Baltimore is a city like so many other American cities that has a lot of promise and a lot of challenges. I think about, is that it's a city that has struggled with addiction for a very long time. So many of our lives, like most people in Baltimore, have some proximity to addiction
Right.
because of how hard it hit the city. It's a city that has dealt with crime and ebbs and flows. So that's been hard in a city with a school system that struggled. On the flip side, it's a city with like incredible culture. Like the neighborhoods and the style and the way people show up in the world and the way joy looks like. So I'm hopeful about the city. I do think that we need to focus on more structural things in the city. That what does it look like to come from a city or to be in a city where like so many adults can't read? That like limits the way that you can make choices in the world, or like the way that we think about addiction is that there's not enough residential treatment, and like we should figure that out, right? Like, so there are all these structural issues that I think that city government, city leaders have punted on for a really long time, and some of that is that like you said, is that I worry sometimes in the city that people haven't imagined that that like the city can actually be
Right.
this like incredible place in these
Right.
ways. And I remember growing up, I live in Baltimore still, but I remember being a kid and like Morgan and Coppin were the only colleges I'd ever heard of, right? And not
Yeah.
that they're not good places to go.
Right, but you just wasn't exposed to.
Yeah, I just hadn't even like imagined a
Right.
world outside of like that I could actually attend, like,
Exactly.
and I think luckily like the internet has made the world bigger for people. But I remember being a kid and like the world was pretty small to me, like that was, and like I remember the first drug bust I saw when I was like 10, and I remember all those things that just seemed normal. Like I was like, well, this is what it means to
Right.
grow up, and as an adult, I'm like, that was not normal.
Your mom left at 3. How has that affected, or did it affect you as you started to mature and develop and figure out who you were as a person and as a man?
Yeah, I think so. Both of my parents were once addicted to drugs. My father raised us. My mother left when I was 3. It is different. My sister is a little bit older, and she remembers her more than I do as a kid. I don't remember her leaving because I was so young. I know her now.
Yeah.
So that's just different. I think that there's always a question of what does it mean when people can leave, and I know the power of addiction because I grew up in a community of recovery because of my father's recovery. And it's been interesting to be an adult now and think about rebuilding a relationship that just is is gone. But I know that there's a lot more to do with regard to my relationship with my mom. I know that in the city that we've just been touched by addiction in so many ways. Our house burned down when we were in 4th grade, so there are no photos of the 4 of us. There are no we don't have toys. That's just all those things got burned. So really we're rebuilding a relationship now that I'm an adult.
How difficult is that?
I think it's as difficult as anything else. That there is a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of healing to be done on her end. She remembers leaving. I don't remember her being. I just remember her not being there. So yeah, it's work.
Would you say you were born an activist or a leader, or is that something that gradually became embedded in you over a course of time?
Yeah, I think that we aren't born woke. Something wakes us up, and for me as a kid, I was in student government from 6th grade to my senior year in college. So that was important to me, and I think I led in those spaces, and was so fortunate to be around other young people who were leading. And then it was Mike Brown's death that made me focus on criminal justice so deeply. Before that, education was I taught, I opened up an after school center, did a lot with young people. That was my focus. But it wasn't until Mike got killed that it sort of changed my focus to really hone in on the criminal justice system.
So at the time Mike Brown was shot, you were living in Minneapolis. And at that time, you had about 900 followers on Twitter. And now you are the voice of and for 914,000 followers on Twitter. Do you feel any pressure at all to just maintain that level of wokeness every day, because people look to you for, that type of, political and political guidance.
Yeah, I think I've always thought about Twitter as a friend that's always awake. So that's the way I think about putting things on Twitter. So like today I tweeted that I don't know how people use body wash and not
I saw
soap.
that.
'Cause, like I don't know, soap is, I like grew up using soap.
Yeah.
So that is as important to like that's like what I would tell my friend if they were right there, but nobody was near me. So I was like,
Yeah.
let me just put it on Twitter because that's like my friend. And that is also how I talk about social justice things. So I'm mindful of the platform. I'm mindful of not tweeting things that I don't know are true, or being really thoughtful about like if I'm trying to process something, being really clear I'm trying to process it. That was different when I had 800 followers than now, because people like have long memories online.
Yeah.
So I'm more mindful, I think, for sure.
You mentioned tweeting things that aren't true. You were in a bit of controversy with Whoopi Goldberg because of your tweet about your blue vest, and then in the whole Planet of the Apes, comparison. Do you try to steer clear of those type of things that may be deemed controversial because people are looking at you every day and following all of your tweets and following your every move, or are you just like, everybody's not going to agree with everything I say? Some things may be controversial, some things may not, but I can't shield what I say because of who's going to think, because what I say you may deem to be controversial.
Yeah, I'm never worried about, it was controversial 3 years ago to say the police were killing people, right? And we were saying it loudly in the streets. So my bar is never like, what is controversial?
Yeah.
With that, there were so many people who reached out to me and said that this is an issue, and I didn't say anything about it. And then somebody I trusted reached out, and they said it was another issue, and I was like, well, let me make a statement about it.
Yeah.
And I deleted it. So by the time Whoopi even said anything on The View, it was already gone. I think that is one of the sort of interesting things about having a platform, is that it didn't matter that it was already gone. Like,
Right.
she still wanted to make a comment on it. And that is sort of hard. I appreciate Whoopi's contribution to the arts, and I remember when she defended somebody in blackface, and I say that because I've seen her grow from her mistakes, and I've grown from seeing her grow from her mistakes. And I look back on that experience with the Planet of the Apes tweet as like there's some things that I learned that I could possibly do different in the future.
And we're all human. We all go through moments in our life where we experience growth. And if you're not growing, then, what are you doing, essentially? So you are known for your activism in Ferguson, in Baltimore, and Baton Rouge, which is where you was arrested. When you were arrested, what was going through your mind at the time? Like, how did you feel? What did you think would happen to you? Because just like the activists, before you and before everyone else, back during the civil rights movement, they too were arrested, and they dealt with a lot of, similarities and things like that. So how did you feel at that time? Like, were you afraid?
Yeah, I think, I'm mindful that I'm one of many people who has stood and continues to stand for what's right. What was interesting about that arrest is that I was filming at the time, and they told me not to stay in the street, and I was like, I need to go to work on Monday, so I'm actually gonna like stay not in the street, and you could see that on the video. So I didn't know that I thought that I got caught in like a stampede of protesters. I didn't know that I'd been arrested until I tried to get up, and there was somebody pushing my shoulders down. I'm like, why is somebody pushing my shoulders? And it turned out to be the police. So that was interesting. 17 hours that I was like detained by the police down there, and I was with so many people who like were willing to put their bodies on the line to fight for what was right. So that's not. Yeah, so I'm proud of all of those people that were willing to go outside and to be there. And, we went to Baton Rouge at the request of other activists to stand with them. I'm mindful of how many people came to St. Louis and came to Ferguson. We were in the street for the initial wave of the protest to like stand with us. So that was a sort of a wild time, especially because I hadn't really been in Baton Rouge that long. It's like I got in there, we went to a community meeting, went to lunch, and then like I took a nap. Went outside. I was outside for like 45 minutes before I got arrested. And the goal wasn't to get arrested. That wasn't a plan. That wasn't the mission. I was actually in jail longer than I was not in jail in Baton Rouge.
Do you find that there is a correlation between education and activism?
Yeah, is that you can't fight for what we don't talk about and what you don't know. So
Yeah.
so much of the world, so much of this work is like about helping people like understand systems and structures better, and like helping people think and imagine what a future can look like in a more thoughtful way. So I think that they come part and parcel.
Do you think there is a lack of activism within the inner urban communities because there is a lack of education?
Yeah, I don't know if that. So I do think there's general lack of education. We need to like
Right.
teach people much better, especially the marginalized, the poor. Uh, in this country, we have a deep legacy of racism and disparity with regard to education. So like that is,
Right.
I agree with that. The second thing, I think that with the activism, I think that there's some people who have fought for so long and they feel like the world hasn't changed, right? So there are people who are like, why should I keep putting my body on the line because like it hasn't materialized anything. Right. I think that that was one of the reasons why people didn't vote, is that people felt like they voted their entire life and they still got tear gas and they still got arrested and like it didn't actually change society for them. I think that what the organizers and activists know is that when we say that the arc of justice bends, or like the arc, the moral universe bends towards justice, King's quote, is that I know that it only bends because people bend it, and that it takes people stepping up and saying, this is what I want my community to look like. This is what I think the future can look like for it actually to get there. That none of this is inevitable. Like people made this, and because people made it, they can remake it and they can undo it and they can refashion it.
Right.
And that's really important to remember.
Do you think we as a people have become spoiled? And I ask that because our grandparents and our great great grandparents and our great grandparents, they were out in the streets. They were protesting. They were fighting for, their rights. They were doing sit-ins. They were doing boycotts. And now I see people. The mindset is, if it doesn't affect me, why am I going out in the streets and fighting for something that doesn't have anything to do with me? But I feel like we have, a lot of us think we have access to a lot of these things, even though we don't have access to a lot of these privileges. But it's all about the mindset. But I feel like a lot of people have become very spoiled and just keep to themselves, and they feel like, I'll be fine. This doesn't affect me directly, so why am I going to go and try to make a difference for something that I'm unaffected by?
Yeah, I think that like one of the things that we have to do as organizers, as activists, is remind people like of how they are affected, and just because people aren't being lynched in the same way, and just because slavery doesn't, or enslavement doesn't look the way look before, doesn't mean that people aren't still being impacted by those systems and structures. So there are a lot of people who never thought the country could be crazy, and then they saw the Muslim ban, and they're like, wow, I never knew injustice. And we're like, we told you this was possible, because we've lived in a world where this has been possible for a long time. Or the trans ban, or any of the, who would imagine that the president of the United States in 2017 would defend white supremacists who violently walked into a town and it resulted in a young woman being killed, right? Like, that's so different for some people, but it looks like the same old America to so many other people.
Right.
So I don't know if people are comfortable so much as they don't understand how the system is actually impacting their lives on a day-to-day basis. And that is part of the work of education, so that people understand like the root cause, so that we can focus the energy for the fight.
So take me back to 2014, when you were in Minneapolis before you decided to take the 9-hour drive to Ferguson, to become involved with the protests over Mike Brown's killing. Like just
So before that?
Yeah. So you were working for the school system.
Yep. So I went to college. I graduated from college in 2007. I taught sixth grade math in East New York, Brooklyn, which was great. And then I also worked at the Harlem Children's Zone, helping to lead the largest community center in the zone. And then I moved back to Baltimore, opened up an after-school, out-of-school program for 5th through 8th graders. So that was awesome. And then I trained and supported a third of all the new teachers in the city of Baltimore. Then I became like the number 2 in the Office of Human Capital at the school system. Left that work in Baltimore, became the number 2 in the Office of Human Capital in Minneapolis Public Schools. And then Mike got killed and I went to Ferguson. So up until up until sort of Mike Brown's death, education had really been sort of my focus. I was a student leader when I was so from middle school through college, and then like I became a teacher, and my sister was a middle school math teacher. Sort of randomly, we both became middle school math teachers, and she's now an assistant principal. We both have worked in district offices in different places. We never worked together directly, but education became sort of randomly an important thing to us that we committed so much of our careers to. And now I do more in the criminal justice space than education, but still really important to me.
So you were home at the time, like when you saw the protest in Ferguson? Were you home?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I was at work. I was home. You know, he got killed on the 9th.
Yeah.
And then it was August 16th, 2014. I was sitting on my couch. I lived alone in a great place in Minneapolis, and I saw what was happening on CNN. I saw what was happening on Twitter, and I was like, this looks like something looks off here. So I didn't have anything to do the next day, and I was like, I could either stay here and putz around the city, or I could just go see for myself. So I got in a car, drove 9 hours, ended up in Ferguson in the middle of the night on the 16th, and that was the beginning for me.
Did you go to Ferguson with an objective, or did you go and say, I just want to be a part of the movement and be with my people and protest that this is an unjust killing?
Yeah, it wasn't. We didn't call it a movement in those early days. We were just in the street.
Right.
I went to bear witness. I was like, I want to go see for myself. And I remember being tear gassed the second night I was in St. Louis. And it was in that moment that I was like, I'm a protester, right? Like, this is wild, and I'll do whatever I can to make sure people don't have to experience this. But at the beginning, I wanted to just see. I was like, I saw what's happening on the news. I saw what's happening on Twitter. I was like, something looks off here. And I was like, the least I can do is go stand with people. That's the lowest bar. And then when I got there, I was like, this is actually pretty wild.
And it was in St. Louis when you joined the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, it's not really joined. I think is the join makes it sound like there's a sign-up process. I think that the media called it Black Lives Matter after we had already been in the street, right? So that is how people sort of talk about this moment. But I was one of many people who stood in the street because it was the right thing to do, and stayed in the street because it was the right thing to do, way before anybody called it a movement, way before people had sort of given it a moniker.
And during the time you launched a campaign when you were in Missouri, talk about those for a second, just so that people can really, because I feel like there's always going to be a lot of work to be done, and there's always going to be moments where you have to build on what's already has been done. So just because you launch those campaigns, that doesn't mean that this is the end. There's always going to be more that you need to do. So I feel like those campaigns and the newsletter was just a part of the foundation, and then you continuously build on top of that to achieve whatever the ultimate goal is.
Yeah, so Campaign Zero was the first platform that emerged at the national level out of the protest community. It was, and it still is, a really focused and policy-oriented solution. So everything from body cameras, which a lot of people talk about, to police union contracts, to use of force policies, things that hadn't gotten a lot of light. It was important for us to create space and to do it as protesters, to do original research, to put these solutions out there so that people could see that we could actually change the systems and structures. It might be hard, but we can do it. And we wanted to make sure that protesters around the country had the data to do it if they needed to. So we still talk to people in communities who were they want support with their police union contract, or they want support in something else, because we know that people are ready to fight. They just need the information.
In the resources and the backing. So you ran for mayor of Baltimore last year. What was that to, how can I put this? What was the motivation behind that? Behind you running for mayor?
Yeah, I think that being in a city like Baltimore, the mayor's role has chance to really change people's lives and like do it at a structural level. And I was sitting down and I was thinking about who I was going to support in the mayor's race, and there was nobody I was going to support. And I was like, I think I could do this and do this well. You know, I think I put my name in really late, and like, you know, in hindsight, I would have probably done that differently. But it was incredible to meet so many voters and to talk to so many people about their vision for the city and to put together a plan for how we get there. You know, I think about Baltimore as a place where like we can program the city to death, but that has not changed the systems and structure. I think the mayor's office has like a real unique opportunity to like actually change systems and structures.
Do you think that there would have been a potential conflict of interest, people knowing that you are involved with the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and then had you been elected as the mayor of Baltimore, now you are the mayor of Baltimore as well? Many people may not have thought that those two would go hand in hand. Do you feel like you would have had to have left one in order to be held accountable as the mayor of Baltimore?
No, I think about, you know, I've experience working inside of big systems. I was just the chief of human capital for the school system in Baltimore. You know, and the work in the movement is being really explicit about a commitment to equity and justice. In a city like Baltimore, that commitment is ever present or needs to be ever present in city leadership. So I don't think that that is that those were in conflict. There were some voters who would have rather me stayed an activist and be inside the system, right? That was there, that they appreciated what I could do outside of the system rather than inside. You know, I'm at the end of the day trying to change. Like, I want real people's lives to be changed. I don't want the conversation to be the only work that we can do. And I think about leading a system and structure as like one of the key ways that we can actually do that change.
So you promote change and you are a voice for change, but many people, Black men, don't really agree with your status and standpoint on the basis of your sexuality. And you were recently on Being My Jane speaking, and one of the characters called you the F word. And when he sat down with another one of the characters on the show, he said that he can't follow you because you're gay. And there was a series of tweets, I believe it was maybe a year ago, where a man was saying, as a black man, I can't follow someone who is gay. How does that make you feel that you are doing all this work for the betterment of people, yet there are a group of people whose mindset cannot wrap around the concept that, okay, you're gay. What does my sexuality have to do with my activism?
Yeah, so it's a reminder that we have more work to do with uprooting homophobia, that we can continue to talk and highlight the complexity of masculinity, that all of that is still ahead. And I also know that I don't have to be your entrance to this work, that there are many ways that you can enter the work, and that we don't have to be friends for me to want you to be free. You know, it might mean that we won't work closely together, but I know that like we can fight for a world with equity and justice, and I still want you to be free, even if you don't personally like me or if you are like a deeply homophobic, things like that. But there's a lot of work to be done with that. You know, I think that we are having more public conversation about race and sexuality and justice and all of those things, like the trans community. We're talking about the trans community in public in ways we've never done before, and that's incredible. I know that the conversation is often like the beginning though, and not the end. That like, while we're talking about what it means to be a gay man and show up in the world, and what it means for the trans community to show up in the world, that these conversations often lead to people thinking about the world differently, but that's not always as quick as we want it to be.
Do you think if you were a white gay man that we would be having this conversation?
You know, I don't know. I do know that whiteness shows up, that like white privilege like changes the way that things are experienced, but I don't know.
So social media has done a great job in helping you to amplify your voice and your message. There has definitely been a positive impact for you in your work. Have you experienced what are the negative and what backlash have you received from social media? Yes, it's great, but it also, just because it's good, it also everything comes with bad also.
Yeah, I don't know. I love Twitter. Twitter is my home more than other platforms. It just like I naturally understand it. I think that I'm mindful that sometimes people have hard and fast opinions on Twitter before they have read anything or
Yeah.
before they have actually listened to the whatever, or like some people are mad at me about things I actually have never said, and you're like, well, I don't know where you got that from, right?
Right.
So that is like a little frustrating. I don't take any of it personally anymore. Like I understand that like you don't know me and I don't know you, and I am always mindful of the difference between the people who have put something on the line and feel a certain way and the people who've not put anything on the line and feel a certain way. I'm also mindful of the people for whom this work is really theoretical versus the people who this work is really practical. So like I talk about education with a lot of people. My understanding of education is informed by being a teacher and an after school provider and a senior leader in 2 public districts. It's not informed by just like 20 articles I read, right? And I sometimes sort of go back and forth with people who have really deep-seated opinions, and they have only read like 3 articles. They don't know. They've never been in a classroom with kids. They've never worked in a school before. They've never made any decision that affects more than 2 people. Like, so I'm much more calibrated with those things.
Was that one of the motivating factors for you to launch your podcast, to continue to educate people outside of 140 characters on?
Yeah, I want people to I was meeting all these incredible people, and I was having really a productive conversation with them. I wanted more people to be able to have conversation with them, and like this was the way to do it. So that's important to me. And then I wanted to create space where people could learn. Like that was important to me.
Even though you are well known, did you expect for your podcast to be well received? Because I'm always seeing people retweeting and being really excited about the people that you've interviewed and the conversations that you have on your podcast.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for the reception to the podcast.
Yeah.
I hope that people continue to listen to it. I'm proud of the conversations that we've had and the ones that we have planned to talk about things that don't normally get a lot of attention, and specifically have created a space where like we don't talk about Trump all day because enough people are talking about Trump all day. So making sure that we can talk about the other things, right, that are happening in the world that people need to focus on that aren't just Trump. So yeah, I'm grateful. This is just the beginning of the podcast. It started like March 20 something. So it's been almost half a year that it's been around. It's a lot of work, way more work than I thought it'd be.
Tell me about it.
So yeah.
Are you going to break them down into seasons, or are you just going to?
I don't know. Oh, it's all too far. I'm like still.
Got it. So the last 8 years, the previous 8 years prior to Trump's presidency, Obama was in the White House, and he represented progress. A lot of people never thought that they would see the day where a black man would, be in the White House. And then now we have Trump, who to some represents regress. We have taken a lot of steps backwards, which seems like we've moved back hundreds of years, back to what slavery was. Did you think that we couldn't go that far back?
Yeah, I wrote this op-ed supporting Hillary before the election, and one of the things I talk about there is Trump's believing Trump when he says he wants to take us to an America that is in the past. I think that people of color have always had reason to believe white people when they say they want to do bad things, and he is somebody who said he wanted to do bad things, and he's following through on all his promises. So not shocked by it as much as I was hopeful that people will make a different choice. I think that there's so many people who are fervently ideological at the expense of real people's lives, and I think there are people who didn't like Hillary for whatever reason. And it was ideological, and the consequences that we have Trump right now, who is doing way more damage than any Democrat would have done in this moment, And that would be fine if it didn't have a real consequence on people's
Right.
lives, right? Like if people weren't at the threat of losing health insurance, and like this isn't,
Yeah.
it's not a joke, it's not a game, this is not theoretical. He's doing real things that have implications on real people's lives, and I worry about how sometimes people are willing to sacrifice real people's lives for some ideological purity.
But do you think Trump's presidency represents that ideology and how majority of America feel? Because I feel like, during Obama's term, we're like, okay, yes, people voted for him twice, which means that, or I would think that a lot of people have made up in their mind that they are for progress and we are going to continue to move forward and, continue to build on what has been a mess for, hundreds and hundreds of years. And then when Trump ran, he's saying all of these things and people are like rallying for him and saying, yes, 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 we want Trump, we want Trump, we want Trump. And now he's in and people are like, yes, 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 go Trump, go Trump, go Trump. So it's like somebody has to agree with the things that he's doing. There has to be a majority that's like, and I feel like what's happening in Charlottesville is a great representation of those people who are diehard, Trump supporters before he ran for office and now that he is actually in office. It's kind of,
Yeah, so I'm reminded though that Trump didn't win the popular vote, so
Right.
it wasn't like the majority of the country chose Trump. The way we select the president chose Trump, and that there are a lot of people who chose not to vote for whatever reason during this election. So it wasn't he didn't come into the White House with a mandate. He doesn't have a mandate. He has institutional power right now that we continue to see have a bearing on people's lives in a negative way, but. I don't think, and I think that we need to be really mindful to always couch this presidency in like it didn't have a mandate. America didn't choose him; the process chose him.
right. I read this morning an article that Teen Vogue posted 4 years ago, and the title was "How Nice White People Benefit from Charlottesville in White Supremacists," and it basically talks about white privilege and how how specifically white people are just rallying, behind Trump, and the fact that white people don't realize, their privilege. And just watching the unrest in Charlottesville, you can see how the police are treating the white supremacists. And then when you look at the protests in Ferguson and Baton Rouge and even Baltimore, you see how the police treat the black protesters. It's like it's like we're rewinding back, in history. Do you think white people will ever understand their privilege, or are they so privileged they will never understand it because they are so privileged and they never had to understand their privilege?
I think some people do understand it. I think that there's some people who are afraid of losing the systemic advantages that they have
yes.
and that they're fighting to keep them.
Got it.
But I think one of the most powerful things about Charlottesville is the number of white people who are willing to push back against the other white people. Right,
Yeah.
that was actually important because it didn't require black people to be the only people standing up
Right.
for race and
Right.
justice, for equity and justice. So I'm hopeful about that.
Do you think now, with everything that is happening present day, that the country has finally accepted that racism exists in 2017?
I think that people generally know that there are deep disparities, that systems aren't just and equal. I think that there's agreement on that. I think there's not necessarily agreement on what to do about it.
So I feel like when we protest, we are protesting because we are oppressed. And when others protest, they protest because of privilege, and how you say when you said they don't want to not be afforded those, opportunities that they have because of their privilege. Do you think that it's possible, and it is possible, but do you think that it's possible for the oppressed and the privilege to just come together, or do you think there always has to be some type of, and there always will be some type of separation? We're just going to be fighting for.
Yeah, I think the unity. I think it's super possible. I think about the civil rights movement as work, as a time where the people were trying to bring people together. I think about activists like Fred Hampton. The Panthers understood that like solidarity is a source of strength, and I think that we're in a moment now where we're seeing unprecedented levels of activism from all communities who are ready to be a part of the fight. So I believe those things.
When people say we aren't our ancestors, meaning like, listen, we will throw hands, like don't try it. How does it make you feel? Do you feel like we should be nonviolent, or should we protect ourselves and be like, hey, like, listen, you coming at me, in order to protect myself, I need to, defend myself.
Yeah, we make a distinction between violence and self-defense, but also, we know that we didn't invent, we didn't discover injustice, and we didn't invent resistance, right? We exist in a legacy of people who've done this work and continue to do this work. I think that what is different and what we should acknowledge is that we just have different tools in this moment, that we are able to use the internet, social media in ways that like they couldn't do before. We've lived on the other side of the Voting Rights Act. We've lived on the other side of the Civil Rights Act. Whereas they were living in that moment, so they didn't know what disparities would look like later because like they couldn't. So I think that we need to be mindful of updating and building on what they had in the same way that they like built on what they had, and that we come in a legacy of that.
So the most visible are the most vulnerable, and you are the most visible in this movement. Do you feel vulnerable at times?
Yeah, I'm mindful that there's so many people across the country, whether they are in their communities, in their schools, at the state level, who are doing work and put themselves on the line and risk their safety for this work. I'm one of many people. So I know that the people that we're up against want us to be too afraid to continue working, and I won't be too afraid to continue working. I'm mindful of my safety. I'm mindful of where I put my body. But I know that this work requires us to like keep showing up.
Do you ever, because you are so consumed with, the movement and, fighting on a daily basis, do you ever get to just turn it off? Or do you sometimes wish you can turn it off and just let your mind, regenerate and, process what's going on? Because I feel like you always just have to be on all the time.
Yeah, so I have great friends. I'm really close to my sister and my father. So I spend a lot. I have enough downtime where I can like just be with my thoughts and watch Game of Thrones or like hang out with friends. So I'm really thankful for my friends and my family.
Yeah. So last question: what motivates you to continue to put yourself, your body, and your voice on the line to be the voice of many?
Yeah, I know that a better world is possible. Like I know it. I think about when I taught 6th grade math in Eastern Brooklyn. I think about those 11-year-olds is they deserve a world that's better than this world today. And like part of my job as an adult is to fight for that world so that they can live in it. I know that we can live in a world where the police don't kill people, where there's justice and equity. Like I know those things are possible, and what we have to do is figure out how to get us there. Like that is the work that keeps me up every night and keeps up so many other people. But I'm hopeful because across the country, I've just seen so many young people, so many older people like find their power in a way that is really, really encouraging.
Well, thank you for coming on today and
So
sitting
good to
and
be
talking
here.
with me and sharing your story and, just educating everyone on, what this movement is all about and, what's happening in the current times. And before we leave, I actually have a quote from Malcolm X. And he says, "You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can have peace unless he has freedom." Thank you again for joining me, and have a great day, guys.
Cool.